morning and welcome to Rising. Of course, we have just a great show for you today on this Tuesday morning. Hello, Niall. I was reflecting actually that a milestone was passed by unacknowledged. My first time hosting Rising was 4 years ago in late June. Oh. So I've now been at this job, at this desk for 4 straight years.
I'm sorry we didn't mark your anniversary.
Yeah, where was my cake and hat?
Anniversary Rising cake, with the logo emblazoned upon it.
Do you remember the old the smiley face
yes,
he used to have reflected in the desk? Risey, I called him.
That was a shame to lose him. Maybe we'll get that in sometime in the near future. You never know. In the meantime, what is on your radar, Robbie?
Let's get to it. The moderate liberal faction of the Democratic Party just keeps getting bad news. Democratic leadership, in the persons of Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, is temperamentally moderate, culturally progressive, and lukewarm at best on economic populism, which means they aren't exactly loved by the left. It turns out, however, that unique combination of beliefs is fairly unpopular not just with the left, but with the entire Democratic Party's base. Now, don't take my word for it. Even as mainstream, a liberal MSNBC host, Joe Scarborough, has noticed that socialist-friendly left progressives are destroying the more moderate voices in the party. People like Senator Bernie Sanders, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and of course Zohran Mamdani, the Democratic Socialist sensation, who easily defeated former Governor Andrew Cuomo to become the Democratic Party's New York City mayoral candidate. Here was Scarborough stating the problem for moderates quite plainly on Morning Joe.
The 3 most compelling figures, the mayoral candidate, Bernie Sanders, and AOC, the 3 most compelling figures since the election have been far left of, let's say, the mainstream of a lot of Americans. Why can't moderate Democrats, why can't conservative moderate Democrats like you make that same compelling message?
It's a very good question. Now, I have an answer. Morning Joe probably won't like it. Look, increasingly, there's just less and less room in the Democratic Party for moderate voters. Now, part of the problem, undoubtedly, is that the Democratic Party's elite leadership has failed catastrophically, time and time again, to deliver what its voters want. Now, say what you will about the Republican Party, but GOP leaders finally realize that the base loves Trump, there's no way around it, and wants elected members of the party to fall in line with him. Now, GOP leaders rarely try to thwart Trump directly. If they do work against him, it's cowardly, in secret. They know they cannot openly oppose Trump. The Democratic Party, on the other hand, is extremely reluctant to embrace its most popular standard bearers. We can go all the way back to 2016, of course, when the party pulled out all the stops to coronate Hillary Clinton as the candidate, even when rival Bernie Sanders proved unexpectedly popular. You know how that turned out. This time around, Democratic leadership steadfastly maintained no one should challenge Biden, debate Biden, or provide an opportunity to primary voters to select someone other than Biden. After Biden's infirmities were exposed, the party picked Kamala Harris, and she lost. You see the problem? Democratic elites just don't understand their voters. Now, it's true that not everyone who is part of the Democratic base wants economic populism or socialism, but the share that wants neoliberalism paired with cultural progressivism, well, I think that's shrinking every day. If you want to beat a Sanders or a Mamdani, you have to do better than a Clinton or a Cuomo. And as far as the New York mayoral primary goes, this should have been obvious. Cuomo's failures, frankly, they're even more apparent than Hillary Clinton's or Kamala Harris's. In recent memory, Cuomo resigned his office after a sexual misconduct scandal and a COVID deaths-related corruption scandal. And that's who Democratic elites wanted? They're probably right now to be concerned about the general electability of candidates like AOC and Mamdani, who have previously espoused views on crime, foreign policy, gender, all sorts of other issues that do place them, in my view, on the extreme left fringes, despite their relatively more appealing personalities and policy platforms, perhaps on other issues. But look, politics is about a lot more than policy. I wish it was just about policy, but it's about so much more. The Democratic Party's so-called moderates are failing a very basic likability test, and the ultimate beneficiary of their short-sightedness will be the eventual 2028 GOP nominee, who's presumably Vice President J.D. Vance. So I saw this clip, Ken Klippenstein shared it on Twitter, of Morning Joe, putting the question to a moderate Democrat, why do you people, our people, because I think Morning Joe is more affection for them, keep losing in head-to-head matches with these people who have far-left policy platforms? And I think it's a fair question. I think part of it is just the likability, is the personality, and then maybe it speaks to other issues as well, including just the failure of leadership to find appealing moderate candidates or to have even the trust of Democratic voters. I don't know. What do you think Democratic voters want?
Well, I mean, I think Democratic voters want pretty bold proposals and bold rhetoric to go with it. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit more later in the show as well. One of the key points here, I think, is people on the left actually believe in what they're saying. And therefore, I think they often make more compelling messengers than people on the center left or of the sort of Morning Joe type. Now, of course, people can argue about whether the ideas are right or not, but the conviction, I think, does give them a greater impetus in the way they put that. The other point I would make about the sort of Morning Joe style of moderation is it often gets into that kind of rich guy's liberalism, which is essentially socially liberal and economically conservative, and there isn't.
Those are my views, right here.
Yeah, exactly. And the Libertarian Party does fantastically in general elections, as you know. I mean, the point is that there is a much bigger market, I think, for the kind of economic populism that some people on the left are putting forward, and we see it in opinion polls. Should the minimum wage be increased federally to $15 an hour? 65% support in a 2023 poll. Is it the government's responsibility to make sure all Americans have health care? 62% from Gallup last year. Should taxes be raised on big businesses and corporations? 63% yes in a Pew Research poll this year. So there is, I think, a market for that. And the kind of Michael Bloombergian kind of version is not, in fact, particularly widely desired, certainly in the Democratic Party.
That's the key point. I think it is not widely desired in the Democratic Party, or at least the fired up Democratic base who's going to show up in primaries. That's the problem. Those kinds of people, warmed over neoliberalism is just not appealing at all. On the overall point that, I always get shown that map of the four quadrants, and there's like no voters in the quadrant that would roughly be my politics, the socially liberal, although I don't really like to describe myself that way, but socially tolerant, government not involved in social life and government not involved in economically life, and that there's not very many voters. That I will push back. That I finally did a little bit of research on how that result was manufactured. To get at that, the questions that lead you away from that quadrant are I think, very, very misleading. They require you to have given responses to end up in that quadrant that I would, for instance, have never indicated. It would there are things about I forget exactly what they were. Something about
the social side or the economic side.
And it's a confusion of both. Like you had to say, do you think? You had to commit to some very fairly redistributionist policies to even end up in there. It's like I think it was a very poor person's understanding of what a libertarian ideology is, and that is why you didn't have many voters testing into it.
Well, if only they understood libertarianism, they'd be flocking to your banner.
Maybe I'll do a radar on that topic a little bit later, so we can more fully delve into it.
Sure, absolutely.
Up next, Owen Jones stuns Piers Morgan when discussing October 7th, and President Trump just got a formal Nobel Peace Prize nomination from Benjamin Netanyahu. Niall will have a lot to say about that. Stay tuned.